Steve Jobs said the most powerful person in the world is a storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda for an entire generation to come. Today I'm going to show you the one skill that will change your life and your music. Hi, my name is Dylan. I go by IYKO. I'm a full-time engineer, part-time music producer. I aim to help creatives live a more creative life. So what is storytelling in music? Stories are personal narratives of change that are shared with others in effort to connect. In music production, we tell stories, but through notes and keys rather than words and paragraphs. But in every story, there are three requirements. The first is that it must reflect change over time. The second is you start as one version of yourself and you end as another. And the third is you only tell your perspective or your side of the story. All great stories, regardless of length, depth, or tone, tell a story of a 5-second moment in time where one's own beliefs, attitudes, or perspectives have totally changed. In music production, think of your track like a journey. The intro sets the scene, the verses and chorus tell the story, and the bridge and outro bring it all to the climax and resolution of the story. So here in my song, Eyes, the first 8 bars are the intro of the song. We are setting the stage and atmosphere in which the story is going to be told. The first verse comes in and tells the first piece of the story.
Look into my eyes, they shine right now like stars in the sky. I can be the one for you. Tell me what I want, only true.
A lot of this is up to interpretation, but how I interpreted it when I was making the track was a person fawning for love over somebody. I've got a good idea of what I might envision taking place. The next 8 bars of the verse tell essentially the same story, but in a little bit different lens and frame. The song opens up a little bit. It becomes a little bit more airy. The piano shines a bit more, and we can tell something is about to begin.
Look into my eyes, they shine right now like stars in the sky. I can be the one for you. Tell me what I want, only true.
And then we have the chorus, which is effectively the main idea of our song, with many variations in between to give different interpretations of the same core idea. So everyone can and should be a storyteller, but to tell great stories, there are a few things that you need to know. One of the most important pieces of this is the story spine. So what is the story spine? Story spine was originally created by Ken Adams, who works at Pixar. It's a 7-step framework for crafting great stories. The story spine helps with the structure of any play, movie, or narrative. And in music, we generally have an ongoing narrative. It all starts with an opening that we all know very well, Once Upon a Time. In this step, we announce who our protagonist is and what type of story we are telling. We introduce them to the world where our story is taking place. This is only the introduction to our story, and we don't have to tell our audience too much just yet. The goal is to write at just enough to tell our audience what is next to come. And this is the same in music. Our intro sets the atmospheres and the tone of the rest of our track. The next step is "and every day." And in every day, we give our audience more details on the world in which our character lives and what type of challenges they face. In the movie Rocky, our main protagonist is unfulfilled in boxing and doesn't like his day job. This sets the stage and gives us subtle hints to where our story is going to go. Our next step, "until one day," which is what marks the change in our story, where an event happens that drives our main character to action. In music, this is probably going to be the first chorus of our song. It's the first main big event that changes the character in our story in some way. This is the event that pushes them to change their habits, embark on a new quest, or strive towards an exciting goal. This is the critical moment that starts our story. The next step is "and because of that," which introduces the goal or objective our character is trying to accomplish. There's usually two pieces to And Because of That. The first piece describes the immediate consequences that our character is facing as a result of the change. And the second part furthers the development of the consequences, which eventually leads us towards the climax. Climax of the story in the story spine corresponds to Until Finally. Until Finally is when the resolution of the story is set in motion. And using the Lion King, when Simba forgives Scar for killing his father, this is the climax and the pinnacle of the story. But this also at the same time differs from the 5-second moment that we had talked about earlier. The 5-second moment is a marker of change. This occurs much earlier in The Lion King, when Simba transforms from being a young kid with a father to an independent young man. These are different pieces of the story, and the climax and 5-second moment don't necessarily happen at the same time. I think Jurassic Park is another really good example of this. While a lot of people think that Jurassic Park is a movie about dinosaurs, it's actually a movie about Grant, who in the beginning of the movie hates kids and thinks they're gross and stinky, until midway through the movie, he is sitting in a tree and realizes that kids aren't so bad. This is not the climax or the resolution to the story, but it is the marker of the most change. Segueing to And Ever Since That Day, which after an eventful climax reveals the main meaning or narrative of the story. So why am I telling you this? How does this all relate to music, and how does our story spine correspond to pieces of a song? Let's look at another one of my tracks and see how the story spine fits into the story that was told. So we're gonna walk through my track Wonder with the same framework that we just talked about in the story spine. Once upon a time, and every day,
new days are born, new days are born, new days are born, new days are born.
the intro and verse set the atmosphere or stage of our song. The song introduces the components of the main idea. The vocal comes in and we give some idea of what this song is going to be about. In the first verse, we establish the ongoing routine of our story.
Light is touching me, while the dusk gets darker and the days get harder.
In verse 1, we talk about these new days that are coming, and in the pre-chorus, we start to tell a little bit about the challenges that our protagonist is facing. But one day, this happens.
And I can barely see while the light goes under, waiting for a wonder.
Our first chorus describes the main change that happens to our character. In my song Wonder, we've got multiple and because of that. These are the direct consequences of the change or the exposition of the song.
New days are born.
In this section, the lyrics are the same, but we've set them in a very, very different context, and we start building into a new sense of tension and release, which make it tell a little bit different of a story.
Light is touching me, while the dusk gets darker and the days get harder. And I can barely see while the light goes under, waiting for a wonder.
verse and the pre-chorus in the second half of the song is again further developing the consequences of the change that occurred in chorus 1, which brings us into Until Finally.
While the light goes under, waiting for a wonder.
Until Finally. There's a huge contrast between chorus 1 and chorus 2. Chorus 1 is a lot darker, much more minimal, not nearly as bright, and this almost represents the 5-second moment of our song. We were once this, and now we are that. We were once sad, and now we are happy. We were once hopeless, and now we are hopeful. If we listen to chorus 1, this sounds very hopeless. In chorus 2, because of how much brighter the song is and the elements and the instruments we're using, it sounds a lot more hopeful. This represents change in our story. And the last piece of this is our outro. And ever since then,
Light is touching me.
our lyrics say light is touching me. So we start out in our song talking about challenges and the darkness that we are facing. The very first chorus of the story is very dark and hopeless, and there's not a whole lot going on or a whole lot going well for our protagonist. But then in the second chorus, the climax of our story, everything is changed, and we tell our listener why everything has changed by using different elements or instruments that paint a different story. And we send our listener off with one last lyric that says, light is touching me, which in my interpretation is a very, very positive thing. The outro reflects the new normal or the outcome of our story, which is often a repetitive or conclusive chorus. As we just talked about in Wonder, you must start and end your story at different states of being. For me, I like to start with the end of my story, because when I have the end, or if I have the final chorus, I can work backwards to determine the start of my story. Once you have determined the end of your story, seek out the opposite of the transformation you underwent. For example, the final chorus in Wonder was a very, very bright, happy atmosphere with a lot of encouraging elements. So if I want to begin my story, I'm going to start with the antithesis of that, the exact opposite. I'm going to start very hopeless and dark. In this case, the opposite of hopeful is hopeless, so that's where I'll begin my story. So all of this is very theoretical, but how do we put into practice capturing these musical ideas? We have story-worthy moments that happen every single day. But these are often small things that we only notice if we pay attention. Some of my favorite stories to tell are moments in my life that previously would have seemed insignificant, but now with a reflective and more insightful lens, I'm able to see that there are moments in my life every single day where I can derive stories from. The practice that helped me find stories throughout my day was a nightly journaling technique where every single night I reflect on my day and I ask myself the question every night, if I had to tell a story from today, what would that story be? And I write it down. Asking myself each night what my story would have been about gives me a catalog of ideas to pull from when I am lacking inspiration musically. I can take a moment in my life and write a song about it. I can start with a feeling that I had felt that day, and I can try to write a song that conveys that feeling. Another technique we can use to generate stories is something that I like to call music journaling. Music journaling is essentially sitting down for a length of time and not getting attached to any single idea. I usually like to set a timer for about 25 minutes and try to write as much as I possibly can in that 25 minutes. My goal is to just keep my DAW in motion and just to continue producing, continue moving, laying down loops, samples, or bass lines, or helping write the top line to a vocal. The idea is just to put yourself in essentially stream of consciousness writing, where you are just simply acting without thinking and you're not getting too attached or judgmental of the ideas just yet. This can be a super prolific exercise in generating new ideas and effectively generating new stories for us to tell. If your mind goes blank, you can really start by doing anything. Throw kick samples on top of loops with vocals together and jumble it all up into one. What you're doing doesn't matter as much as just continuing the act of writing for the 25-minute period. Both the nightly storytelling reflection and the music journaling can lay the foundation for larger projects down the road. But that leads to my favorite and the most fun part of the music production and storytelling process, which is the refinery of the story and refining your voice. I like to reflect on the song that I'm writing and ask myself a few questions. What story am I telling here? What emotions do I want my listener to feel? How can I enhance the narrative that I'm telling throughout the production process? While going through Wonder earlier, I mentioned some of the instrumental changes and then the atmosphere changes that you can use throughout your production process to convey the message you're going for. The best stories often represent incremental change. I was once lost, but now I am found. I was once afraid, but now I'm fearless. I was once happy, but now I am sad. These incremental changes make our story more meaningful and personal to our target audiences. By sharing your own experiences and emotion, we can relate to our listener on a deeper level. And I know for me personally, that was the whole reason I got into music production to begin with, was really to tell stories and connect with a wide audience. Producing for me is about bridging the gap between myself and the listener. By creating a space of vulnerability and authenticity and sharing my raw emotions, I hope to encourage the listener to do the same. I have two songs that I think really represent vulnerability and authenticity well. One song is called Meant to Be, and this represented the feeling of reemerging into life as a new person. A couple of years ago, I got sober from drugs and alcohol, and I wanted to write a song that represented how it felt to live this new life. The first 3 to 6 months of my life since getting sober were a beautiful and spectacle-inducing time of my life. I wrote a song to represent what that feeling felt like. And it's this massive future-based song with a lot of chord stacks, and it hits you right in the jaw, and it kind of captures you from the moment the song drops. And I started with that feeling and worked backwards and constructed a song around it. And then another one of my songs called 111 represented change and evolution. And it also represented the personal challenges I was going through in my life at the time, how difficult overcoming some of the challenges during active addiction were, how changing to a new way of life can be so painful but also rewarding at the same time. These types of songs connect well with your listener. I believe that through song and through art, people can feel things that they couldn't really put to words before, and I can convey things that I feel in ways that words simply can't. All of this is to say that's why I think reflecting and asking questions about songs that you have written can be a very insightful and healing part of the process. So we've covered a lot about storytelling and music production, and I'm going to leave you with a few practical tips that I personally use and I think you will find beneficial for making your music more story-worthy. One thing you might be able to do is use dynamic changes to convey different parts of the story. What do I mean by this? Like I had shown you earlier, you can use different instruments in your song to hold different meanings. You can use brighter music for something more happy and uplifting. You can use darker, lower frequency sounds to represent strife or change or struggle. Additionally, you can incorporate certain motifs or melodies or reoccurring themes that take place over the course of a track, or even an EP or album if you're doing something more long form. These reoccurring elements will not only encourage cohesion throughout your track, but they will also tell a similar story and all feed back to the main idea of your piece of work. You can also use sound design and effects to enhance your narrative. Sound design and atmospheres and special effects in your music enhance the world that you are building and add texture and feel and grit and detail into your music. Another thing you can do is experiments with song structure and twists. All of the framework I gave you before, from the story spine and the typical song structure, all of these are general guidelines, and these are rules that are meant to be broken. Try switching some of these pieces around. Try putting your bridge before your chorus, or try leaving out a pre-chorus entirely. Just go straight from the verse to the chorus. Add unexpected twists, add plot changes, change your characters, or maybe have a female lead and a male lead sing kind of back and forth. Have 4 bars with the female lead, have 4 bars with the male lead, and have them communicate in an interesting way. All of these are to add dynamics, and all of these contribute to the story that you're telling your listener. Adding on top of the idea of unexpected twists is this idea of but and therefore. But and therefore should be the connective tissue between every piece of your story. So I was walking in the park, but then I saw a dog. So I went over to pet the dog, but it bit me. These types of words keep us engaged in a story, and you can do the exact same thing in music. If you're telling a story, I went to the beach and then this happened and then I went home and then I did this, it just feels like a laundry list, and it's not very engaging because you feel like the next sentence just bleeds and fumbles into one another. And it's the same thing in music. We don't want, to put like this section of a song and then this section of the song and then this section of the song. You want this section of the song, but then your verse, but then your chorus. Therefore, chorus part 2. This is the way in which we want to tell stories. The words but and therefore signal change, and it allows our story to zigzag. The story was heading in one direction, but this happened. Therefore, our character changed. All these ideas will change the identity of your music and change the identity of your story for the better. Storytellers have a superpower. They can make people feel good and whole and right. They can inspire and inform. They can make people see the world in a new way. They can make people feel better about themselves. This quote is from the book Storyworthy, a reading that I had just recently finished before making this YouTube video. And if you're interested to see what other books that I like to read and what other books you might like to read as well, check out this video right here on my top 5 favorite books for music producers.